The horror and brutality of the war on Gaza and on Palestine is shocking beyond belief. You almost wish you could shut yourself off from the next 24/7 scene of the latest atrocity or the latest scene of devastation and military firepower. And I'm sure we all have felt the same. Atrocity in such plain sight. It feels almost grotesque to stand here on a platform and repeat them. The agonized appeal from a doctor trying desperately to preserve life. The journalist trying to choke back tears and rage as she or he attempts to convey the horror and inhumanity of what they're reporting on. The father beseeching a world why his children had to die. The child covered in grime and the dust of destruction, trying to cling on to a surviving younger sibling. Entire families, generations lost. But we must repeat it. This morning's headline: bodies piling up outside Kamal Adwan Hospital where thousands take shelter. Dozens killed overnight in Khan Yunis. Once again, hospitals and ambulances are a prime target. The health system shut down, 60% of homes in Gaza destroyed or damaged, and now, this evening, the latest figures of over 16,000 dead. 70% of the victims are women and children. In reality, we're probably talking around 25,000 with the bodies uncounted buried under the rubble. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, gritting its teeth, having to allow a pause, have now renewed the assault on an even greater scale. A chilling report in Plus 972 magazine and Local Call research there, where they interview a whole number of Israeli intelligence officials about the scale of the bombing, the type of bombing, and the unprecedented use of those weapon systems, including artificial intelligence, on a civilian population. One Israeli intelligence official, not a Palestinian, called this system a mass assassination factory. And then the rhetoric, the genocidal logic of what you hear coming from the mouths of Israeli officials. This is Tzipi Hatovli, Israel's ambassador here in Britain, claiming on Sky News that there was a safe haven in South Gaza from the mass destruction and bombing. And she named it an area called Masavi. And then Sky News panned the camera across the area that she'd referred to. And as far as the eye could see, it was a wasteland. No shelter, no safety, and so on. 1.7 million people displaced, fleeing, and told to flee to these safe zones through post-apocalyptic landscapes and the free fire zones of the IDF. They don't really try to hide their strategy, do they? I mean, I think, these denials are just for form's sake. Any lie will do as long as it demonizes the victims. This is Ben Gvir, National Security Minister. The only thing that needs to enter Gaza are hundreds of tons of explosives from the Air Force, not an ounce of humanitarian aid. The Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, declares, "We are fighting human animals, we will eliminate everything." Yair Lapid, leader of the opposition, asked for his response to the deaths of civilians, mainly women and children, responds, the majority of people who were killed were Hamas terrorists and good riddance. And the president of Israel, who's a Labour Zionist, Isaac Herzog, completely denies any difference between Hamas and the civilian population. It is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It is not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. And this, and speaking as a Jewish anti-racist whose family on my mother's side counts victims in the Holocaust, it's chilling to have to say to oneself, this is the logic of genocide. It is horrific, the demonization. And there's a rap song, an Israeli rap song, that's been on the top of the charts for weeks, where they sing praises to the Israeli Defense Force for destroying rats who shout and chant Free Palestine. I mean, this is horror. Really, it is horror. Two sides of the horror. And this rhetoric sends a message. Every soldier in the IDF knows the mission of war: to terrorize the civilian population into submission, whatever it takes. And language, words, meaning are just stood on the head. From the river to the sea has been a slogan of the Palestinian people right from since the Nakba. It's a slogan of peace, equality, and justice for all citizens living in a historic Palestine. This is traduced in the mud of racism, in a claim that this call is to call for the destruction of another people. I'm old enough to remember when the cry of freedom in South Africa for peace, equality, one person, one vote, was cast as an existential threat. And the armed forces of apartheid shot down school children in Sharpeville to keep South Africa white. In the southern states of the United States, Jim Crow laws were defended as protection from being overwhelmed by a black violent underclass. And lynchings, police clubs, dogs and bombs were used to defend Jim Crow. What we have here is the corruption of words, of language, and of humanity. And I know everyone knows probably these words from 1984, but you almost think this could be on a news report. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. What a horror is this. And this is not simply a barbarity that falls from the sky. It has a root cause, and that cause is important to locate, because in doing so we can begin to end the horror. It's in a system of apartheid, a system of oppression, a system of equality. This is not just a matter of the Nakba and 1948. It's ongoing. It's a permanent process. And along with it, as there has been throughout this system of oppression, there is resistance. Resistance in 1936 in the Arab uprising. Resistance with the formation of the military struggle and the PLO. The mass resistance of Palestinians in the First Intifada and in the Second Intifada and in the Unity Intifada of 1921. And I believe that an oppressed people have the right to resist. And as in South Africa, as in the anti-colonial struggles in Africa and so forth. Resistance holds one of the keys to liberation and freedom. Resistance plus solidarity and the mass movement. And when our leaders and our media talk of violence, I think of the words of a philosopher called Paulo Freire. He said, "Violence is initiated by those who oppress, not by those who are oppressed, exploited and unrecognized. It is not those whose humanity is denied them who negate humankind, but those who denied that humanity." And I welcome resistance not because I welcome violence, but because it is resistance that will bring violence to an end. The resistance of the Palestinians, the kind of resistance that we saw against the Arab dictators and regimes in 2011, and the resistance, for that is what it is, on the streets of London and cities up and down this country, and including the protests here in Dorset and elsewhere. The movement we've seen in Britain, I believe, is of utmost importance. Outside the Arab world, it is by quite a long way the biggest movement internationally. And that's important because Britain is at the heart of this. It was where the Balfour Declaration was signed. And Britain today remains one of the main backers and suppliers of military aid for Israel. I just want to finish with this. You see, despite the horror, I believe we're at a turning point in history. I don't think this is, I know what Mohammed was saying, will we forget? I don't think that. I think we are past that point. Palestine has become both a lightning rod and a detonator for millions across the world who see in the horror and in the hypocrisy something about the world in which we live, in which they live, in which Palestinians live, that has to change. And they want to be part of that change. And they're taking to the streets, they're occupying railway stations, they're going on strike in their colleges and schools for Palestine, to stop the horror, to get a ceasefire, but also because they want a world in which this horror can't go on. And they want to see a change. And that's where I think the hope really lies.